Item number 11 on the agenda is a funding strategy implementation update at Derman.
We love that word, implementation.
Yes.
Thanks. So in the item itself, we went into a fairly detailed discussion of the parameters of the bill. So in the interest of time, I won't go through those, but be happy to answer any questions that people might have about aspects of the bill. I really wanted to spend the time sort of talking about where things are as far as the implementation of the bill. Now that it's been enacted, sort of making sure it's actually being implemented properly. And there's a variety of things we talk about in the item. I'll sort of walk through where we are with that. As far as whether or not we're in fact receiving the contributions, we are. We sent out a directive, as I said in the item, a couple of days after the governor signed the bill to let the employers know about the increased contributions, not only this year, but in the future years, so they had some clear understanding of what to expect in future years. We're now in the second month of receiving contributions based on the higher rates. And looking at the cash flow for August, the increase in contributions is about 15% higher than it was for August of the prior year, which is actually more than what we would have anticipated just based on the rate increase. So it suggests that perhaps there's also increases in compensation being paid to members, which makes sense given the fact that the economy has improved. But I mean, I think we feel comfortable that the employers are in fact paying the higher contributions and remitting the higher member contributions. With respect to some of the other administrative aspects of the implementation, we're continuing to work. This year, the way the bill is drafted, the member contribution rates, while they were increased, remained the same regardless of whether you're at 2% at 6 years, 2% at 62. But beginning next July, those contribution rates will start to diverge, and we had to build in that capability to do that. We were doing that anyway because of AB 340, which created a different member contribution rate for the 2% and 62 members. We haven't yet completed that, but we will get it completed in time for it to be effective, certainly by July 1st of next year. So we're comfortable with the way that's progressing, at least on our end. The employers, there's probably a variety of statuses as far as the employers. Probably some employers can do that fairly readily. Other ones will need to make changes this year to accommodate the different contribution rates for the members. Certainly the most significant change is the fact that the increased contributions only apply to DB compensation and not DBS compensation. This has actually been the issue that we've had more discussions with members about and with employers about, because the way the mechanism will work, it works pretty well for a small component of compensation that goes to DBS, because as you'll recall, the increased contribution rates, both paid by the member and the employer, only apply to DB compensation. There was no change in the contribution rate charged to the DBS compensation. 99% of the money is paid for excess service. People teaching summer school, coaching, any other kinds of after-school activities in addition to their full-time job. And we don't know what that compensation is until after we've completed the school year, run the annual update, see how much compensation was in fact earned relative to their full-time salary rate, and then we make that transfer into DBS. So as it stands now, and will be the case, is that we will have to collect the higher contribution rates on all the compensation. And then at the end of the year, once we figure out what goes to DB and what goes to DBS, we will return to the employer the excess contributions, and then the employer will have to return to their individual employees their contribution to that. With respect to the very small piece of the DBS compensation is for limited term enhancements, we know up front, and the employer knows up front which one that is. They will report that at the proper contribution rate up front. So that's not going to be an issue, assuming that they report properly. But this other compensation, the 99% for this excess service, is clearly going to be a challenge for the employers to make that work. I know that one of the concerns that everyone has expressed is how employees or how members are going to know how much they're supposed to get back from their employers. So with respect to those members who continue to be active, we will include within their individual retirement progress reports how much money that their employer is supposed to return to them from these excess contributions. So if, for example, Sharon had worked, excess service and had paid $50 in contributions for this excess service that above and beyond the contribution rate that should have been charged. We will return to the employer the $50, and we will tell Sharon in her RPR, you are receiving $50 in excess contributions. If they go into their MyCalsters account, if they had multiple employers, we will tell them how much of it is from employer X, how much is employer Y, and so on. It's probably going to come from one employer, but we'll tell them which employer it is. As far as there are going to be members who are who would have paid the excess service but will not get a retirement progress report because they retired after the school year, more than likely, but before we produce the progress report. So we don't know yet how to deal with them specifically, but probably what we will do is, at the very least, include that information in their MyCalsters account so they can go online and see how much of the contributions their employer, their former employer, should be returning to them. We don't at this point have any information about how the employers are going to return the contributions, in what form, whether it's something that's added to their paycheck, whether it's a separate check, whatever it is. This is at the very early stages. This isn't going to be an issue for them to actually implement until a year from now. As we get some better information about how the employers intend to implement this, we will certainly come back to the board to let them know. But from our standpoint, at least in terms of keeping the members aware of what they can expect, we at least certainly with respect to the continuing active members, I think we feel comfortable that using the retirement progress report is a good way of dealing with it. There are other issues that we have to deal. Oh, yes.
Get myself in there. Okay. Let me just ask about that. So I'm pleased to hear that information is going to be in their retirement report, because I think that's definitely a concern for members, is the accuracy of districts reporting. And so I guess my question is, the district is required to return that to the member, yes, correct? Is there language that talks about how quickly, what the time frame is, and what because that's what that's a constant issue I think we get, is what's the power, or what's the policy, or what's the language from which stakeholder groups can kind of support members.
Anything in the statute that provides any time frame. I don't know if there's some general provision. There isn't, and we've had experience in the past of returning contributions to the employer who has to give it back to the members, not to this volume.
Right.
And I don't know what the normal practice is. Maybe Robin or Peggy know what the normal practice is in terms of how quickly it gets back. But at the very least, they'll know, and if they haven't gotten it back within some period of time, they can go talk to their employer about where's the money. But maybe Robin has some better information on that.
Yeah, I don't have any policy statement, but I do want you to know that in the automation of this process out of the Business Direct system, we will provide a listing of the individual refunds, so that, or return of contributions, excuse me, wrong terminology on my part, so that would be available on an employer by employer basis as well. So, that'll give us a timetable as well as a listing that not only should then cross-reference to the member reporting, so we can, we could look at it both ways.
Right. Well, I think it's just good for members to have visibility about it, so
Yeah.
that gives them the power to be able to go back to a district or work with their stakeholder group to kind of.
Yeah.
That's what I'm concerned about, is
Yeah,
they
but
might just not know what they're entitled to.
Given the tie-in of this with the annual update and the RPR process,
Right.
there will be a consistent timeline that those refunds occur,
Okay.
or return of contributions occur, excuse me. So that also might help.
Employees any longer, too.
Right.
That makes it pretty complicated if you're running the payroll system and now you got people that have separated from employment. So this won't be pretty.
Yeah, this is an aspect that the employers, when we
I'm
met with the
anticipating
employers
that,
about this, they
yeah.
were more concerned about this aspect than anything else. The other thing is, part of the issue why there was no timeline put into the bill. It was one of those. This bill sort of evolved very quickly, and we weren't in a position to evaluate how much time or how the employer should do it. So I think once there's some more experience with it, perhaps, if there appears to be a problem, then maybe perhaps the statute could be changed to put in some parameters around that.
So in this instance, this example is where contribution was in excess of what the employee was supposed to be paying, is that right?
Correct.
So their pay would actually be less than what they're supposed to be taking home.
Yeah, exactly. Their take home was less, right?
So it's my understanding that the current education code requires the employer to make right underpayments to any employee, any educator with a certain time frame, and absent addressing being made aware of an underpayment, there's a time frame by which the employer has to make whole what is owed to the employee, and absent making that payment whole within a certain time frame, the employer is then charged interest. It's my understanding the Ed Code, I don't know if that would apply in this case, but
Yeah.
it possibly could because the employee would be underpaid.
I
Peggy?
might add there are additional complications that can make it more difficult for employers. And there could be an element of surprise for some employers who would not have anticipated that they would be the ones receiving the information about excess contributions. And let me set that scenario for you. If someone works for multiple employers, the way the DB plan is designed, we take the highest compensation and put it into the DB plan. So the employer who provided the lowest compensation level would be the one who would receive the return of the contributions. But that might not have been a primary employer. It might have been someone who perhaps did more substitute teaching or something else at that district. So, it could take them by surprise, which could complicate the process for them. Because if it was a full-time employee, they might have a good understanding of how many and the nature of those contributions that could be coming back. So I don't think that we'll see that there is a uniform practice in place across all employers. We want to make sure that we provide employers with clarity about their responsibility. But it would be extraordinarily difficult for us to monitor compliance with that requirement. And so we are going to rely on members locating that information in their RPR and being informed about the likelihood that an employer could be returning money to them for contributions that were paid in addition to what's going into their DB account. But it's not going to be a large amount of money for most of these individuals.
But we do the usual, we'll be sending out circulars to district staff and things like that and do our usual.
We've already told them, the
Yeah.
circular that went out at the
Surveys
end of June.
coming and
Yes.
being educated
And we'll
and-
probably, I'm sure we will remind them when the time comes that you're going to be getting this and here's what you need to do about it.
And we'll be training associated with the automation as well, to let them know how to interpret the information that
Right.
supports the return of contributions.
Great. Thanks, Robin.
Any other board members with comments or questions? Paul?
So my question is on sort of a different part of this, and that is that, so the whole legislation is to address the unfunded liability as of June 30th, 2014, through increased contributions through 2046.
It's the increase, well, no. It's to address the unfunded liability as it applies to service credit
Service
as of
credit,
2014.
right,
As
service
far as the employer's contribution rate is concerned, for the state, it's a different basis.
Yeah, and the employees.
It's just an
that's
increased
that's an
contribution
increase
rate in
forever
return.
because they've now
Because
vested
they
in the
invested the
2%,
benefit, right.
Okay, so we're going to make a decision then in April, or we're going to adopt the actuarial report that sets the unfunded liability as of June 30th, 2014, right? And
Yes.
so then that action that we take in April will set that standard. So then going forward, are the actuarial reports going to, just as they've, been measuring the unfunded liability as of 1990 as well, under that benefit system
Right.
versus, are we now going to start then seeing a measurement of the unfunded liability based on that was in place as of 2014 service credit through 2014, and then a separate measure of either overfunding or underfunding for service beyond 2014?
Well, that's one of the issues that we talk about on page 100 about that you're going to have to develop a policy. Milliman will be here to help with that discussion in the beginning of November about how you're going to do evaluations now. I mean, essentially what you're suggesting is right. We have to do a measurement of what's the unfunded liability associated with the June 30, 1990 benefit structure, because that determines what the state's contribution rate is eventually. Then we're going to have to do a valuation that says, here's the unfunded liability associated with 2014 service credit. And then we got to figure out how do we factor in the state's contribution on this end that we're getting because of this valuation into this valuation. So, and then of course you're going to want to know what's the unfunded liability in total. So it is going to
We're
be,
overfunded. I mean,
yeah, we may be
going
overfunded
forward, we
here
don't-
and
we don't
underfunded
know whether
here.
we're gonna be
Exactly. I
Underfunded
mean,
or overfunded, but
mean,
we're gonna need to know that too,
it's,
right?
it was one of those things that the way that the valuations was done in the past before now was unusual and somewhat complicated because they had a sort of a bifurcated, now it's a trifurcated valuation. And we got to figure out how they interact with each other, which didn't exist before. But that's what the discussion beginning in November is going to be about, is how you conduct the valuation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions or
But
comments?
at least we're getting the
We
money.
thought we'd otherwise.
But the contributions are coming in, so that's okay. We'll make it work. And then, just a couple of other things, just in terms of what the board, you dealt with one of the issues this morning in benefits and services about the employer contribution with respect to reduced workload program and elected officials. You'll sort of incorporate that into the policies that you're adopting overall with respect to a variety of things in benefits and services. And then the last thing is we'll be bringing to you a proposal to make a relatively technical modification to the penalties and interest regulations, because part of the penalty is based on what the state's contribution rate is. And now that that's going to be increasing over time and subject to your adjustments, we want to make sure that the regulations remain in concert with that. So we'll be bringing that to you in the next few months to start that regulatory process as well. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about the bill or its implementation.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll take public comments on this issue. Sal?
Sal Villaseñor with the Association of California School Administrators, but on this particular point, I'm also representing the California business officials because of the conversation that you were just having a moment ago. It's going to be very complex. It's going to require a lot of assurances. I get the point about ensuring that the member knows how much is owed to them, but you also have to be sensitive to the fact that how that money gets provided to them at the local level is of extreme sensitivity to the employer. Situations, I think Jack mentioned, if the individual is no longer working for that particular employer, is the employer responsible for going out and looking for that individual? There are other factors involved in this process that I believe strongly that staff at CalSTRS will work with us, and they'll require some training and some guidance and some more clarity. And who knows, there may even be a need for legislative fixes at some point, but we still have some time here before it actually occurs. But in the process between now and then, we definitely have to be very sensitive about the employer's challenges that they will have with ensuring that the member, in fact, is receiving what is owed back to them. And so just wanted to make that point for the record, but also let you know that we want to work with the staff to ensure that this has the least amount of problems once individuals start receiving their checks and others are not. And hopefully, avoiding a sort of a crisis. Even though the dollar amounts may be small, it still could be very problematic if we don't work together on this. Okay, thank you.
Sandy?
Dr. Sandy Keaton, United Teachers Los Angeles. I hate to say this, but after putting on so many pre-retirement conferences, it startles me, but there's people that never opened their statements when they were mailed to them and probably won't go online and won't be aware of this until who knows when. And then it'll be, where did my money go? Did I ever get this back? So it can be a major issue, and especially in Los Angeles, where we have all these payroll issues. I just want to throw that out there. It's going to be an issue.
Welcome.
Dave Davini, retired school administrator. I'm concerned because I see rising costs to employers, rising costs because of the audit increases, rising cost that are necessary to meet the increased contributions of the employers and rising costs due to trying to keep track of what's involved in this activity. So I think we have to be really careful in how much burden we pass along, because someone at the district has to do this work, and there's no increased money to pay for those increased costs. So, and those increased costs mean less money for staff salaries at the district level and harder problems in bargaining and other things. So I think you have to be really cautious in how you proceed with all of this.
Seeing no other folks at the microphone, thank you, Ed. Item number 12, our CEO's report. Jack?
Thank you very much. Well, I just wanted to formally announce, even though we did it by email, our newest member of our executive staff who's here with us, Lisa Blatt. Please stand up for a sec. And we're ecstatic to have her join the team. She's, of course, worked with us for quite a while. But she brings a lot of energy and really knows everyone that works at CalSTRS from all of her work here on facilities and procurement. And now she'll have human resources under her umbrella responsibility as well. And you'll see her before you. But I think you've all grown to appreciate over time the stringent bar we set for being part of the executive staff. And part of that is to be a strong contributor. And Lisa's track record has shown that over and over again, having built the building brick by brick and everything else. So we just can't be happier that she's with us. And the second thing, I just want to put a finer point on the GASB issue that's in the write-up for you. And again, I'm sure reporters that look at this may cite this number, but again, I want to underscore that the number we provided you is still a preliminary number. When we finish the financial statements in November with you, we'll provide you with the exact net pension liability number. But I did want to make sure you all remember that in the final moments of the passage of the funding bill, we got a request from the legislature asking, again, what would the impact of passing this bill be if it was before July 1st and the beginning of the statement period for GASB. And we explained to them that the timing actually had a very significant impact, although it's not the reason to pass the bill by itself. But nevertheless, you know, we were facing at $167 billion NPL, we were facing the highest net pension liability disclosure in the entire country. There's no doubt about that prior to July 1. And in the presentations that I've made with school officials when we were in that part of our educational cycle, and Robin certainly did far more of these than I did, there was concern, ambivalence. It was not clear what would the impact of schools be on schools bringing that level of liabilities onto their financial statements after July 1. Some arguing it would have no effect, that people understood the basis of this. Others arguing that it would have significant effect in the bond market for schools. So the question was out there. I'm pleased that we've quickly put this number together and got it out there to demonstrate, in fact, the impact of this funding bill on our disclosure. Again, going from, in our first appearances, from $167 billion to just under $60 billion for all of the funds that are under consideration in this calculation, more than just the DB. So extraordinary impact. We will not be the headline story in the country next year when GASB numbers are put out there because of the success of the legislature and the administration doing this bill. Robin, was there anything you want to add on its calculation? I didn't ask you if you had any piece on this, but okay, all right. So it's good news. That's all I had.
Thanks, Jack. Questions for Jack? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item 13, the business renew oversight. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, Jack.
Oh.
The business direct contracting, Are you not reporting that to us?
You know,
Anymore?
I have a report that I have for the month, but originally we had talked about when it reached June 30th, we would not do that longer,
Okay.
but if you'd like that by informal, I can send it to you.
Okay.
I still have it, actually.
Okay.
We're monitoring.
But
it.
it's not so,
I didn't have it in the report any longer, but we are monitoring it every month.
Okay.
And doing all the same operational issues. I didn't know if you wanted to see that for the rest of your life, or if there was a
well.
point. We seem to be, we're not at a perfect
we're
point, but
making
we're at a
progress.
good point. Yeah, we're absolutely making. But let me send you the July report, and you can kind of judge. I want to make sure you feel comfortable with it.
Okay,
Not
thank
just me saying that. So I'll do that. Yes.
Okay, item 13, Business Renew Oversight Assessment, Chris Coyote, Graham Finley, and Grant Thornton.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Graham Finley with Grant Thornton. I'm here to provide our regular oversight report on the Active Business Renew project. We have two projects to report on this month, Pension Solution and Data Preparation. We'll start with Pension Solution. So at this point in the project, our oversight of the Pension Solution project and really our reporting on it has two major themes. The first one is the actual procurement process itself. I think we're all aware that the project's in an active procurement and that's ongoing. The second theme I would label as readiness, really. It's how well prepared is the project to begin implementation activities once the procurement process is finished and a vendor contract is signed. So taking each of those in turn, from the procurement perspective, the project is right on schedule. Final proposals were received on schedule. The round one evaluations were completed on schedule. There's been a down select made to a smaller number of vendors, and those vendors are proceeding into round two. The project has been following the procurement methodology by the book. So at this point, we're pretty confident that unless something unexpected happens, the procurement is going to complete on schedule, and we have no concerns there. To the extent we have had any concerns related to the project and things we've discussed in prior reports, it's been more around the readiness category, and the particular areas that we discussed previously and that we've been spending a lot of time monitoring are around project governance. That's having an established governance plan and being able to follow that plan. Establishing and maintaining an effective schedule and having project management practices that are of the necessary, rigor and discipline that the project is ready to engage with the vendor immediately that a contract is signed, and that the organizational change management planning that the project has undertaken is appropriately resourced and is getting the necessary attention. Over the last month or so, I think we've seen progress in all of these areas. The project has approved a project governance plan, and we're starting to see the project basically operate under that plan. The procurement phase schedule has been updated. It's being adhered to. We're seeing some strength in the project management area, and there's activities underway to improve the resourcing around organizational change management. So it's positive developments in all of those areas, but we don't yet think we've quite seen enough in terms of sustainment on that to be completely comfortable that everything is being improved enough to warrant an upgrade, but we're, I guess you could say, looking for an opportunity to do that in the next reporting period. In terms of our focus for the next period, really it's to continue monitoring the procurement process to validate that the project team is executing the procurement process as agreed to and it's staying on schedule. We'll be observing the vendor demonstrations, the cost evaluation process and the best cost evaluation process and the best and final offer process, and then we'll be focusing in particular on validating that the project is adhering to the governance process that the project has agreed to and documented. So that's our real focus for the next several months as the project works through round two of the procurement process, working towards a contract award, and also starts to put in place all the various project management and organizational change management and governance processes that will begin to be implemented really in practice once a contract is signed next year. So any questions on pension? Okay. So moving on to data preparation. So the data preparation project, if you remember, the purpose of this project is really to do an assessment of the quality of the pension data in the organization and use that data to improve the likelihood of success of the pension solution project by identifying potential areas of weakness in the data and potentially head off problems in data conversion. The analysis tasks were successfully completed during this last assessment period, so all the analysis is done. The vendor contract is now in, I guess you could say, the final stages. The vendor is working on the final reports. They're currently still a little behind schedule. There was a contract extension that was agreed to between SoftSol and CalSTRS that extends the end date of the contract until September 26th, the end of this month. That was at no additional cost to CalSTRS. And that is basically giving the project a little bit of breathing room to complete the final data analysis report and the alternatives and data issues report. The data analysis report, I think, is pretty much a final, about to be accepted at this point, and I think the draft data analysis report is due to be delivered in the next day or two. So even though the project is still a little behind schedule, they are within shooting distance of completing the project per the revised end date at the end of the month. Now, of course, what happens then is that the real work begins, because at that point, CalSTRS has to start to think about what do they do with the information. The whole point of the project is to assess and potentially resolve some of these issues before the pension solution implementation begins. And so that's the work that CalSTRS is going to start to plan for right about now. So over the next month, what we'll be doing is monitoring the completion of the vendor deliverables to make sure that those reports are completed on time, continuing to assess the relevance of the actual recommendations that they actually will be of value to the pension solution effort, but we've had no issues to date in that area. We'll also be monitoring the knowledge transfer activities that are meant to be happening over the next several weeks. Part of the agreement when the extension happened for the end date of the contract was that SoftSol agreed to provide knowledge transfer to the CalSTRS staff to help them use some of the automated tools that SoftSol had created. They created a set of tools to query the existing pension system data and assess potential issues with the data. Those tools will be useful to CalSTRS on an ongoing basis, and should CalSTRS want to rerun those assessments, either at the end of the year or next year or after that, this knowledge transfer is intended to make sure that the CalSTRS staff have the knowledge and training necessary. So that's something we'll be monitoring to make sure they get that. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be monitoring the transition and planning for the next phase of the project. So this is where CalSTRS starts to take on the work of thinking through the actual recommendations and deciding what they're going to do with them. So that's the report on data prep. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Chris. Item 14 is the consent agenda action items, 14A, B, C, and D. I think Johnny handing out the okay, thank you.
The consent agenda.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So Paul, you're 14A, the audits and risks.
We don't need them,
read
though.
this or
We don't
just,
need to read them, the consent, right?
Well, if there's action, we need to
There's action.
Read those items in which action was taken.
What's that, Brian?
Are you talking about
The consent, yeah. Do we need to read these reports into the record?
usually your practice has been only those items where there has been an action taken in a non-delegated committee.
Because
so
we
that-
need to vote on those as
that you
well.
need to vote on. And otherwise, you generally just submit these reports. They appear in your minutes as
Okay.
part of the record.
So-
Great.
And then we've accepted them as printed.
Okay.
And then had whoever called them.
Great. So the suggestion is that we accept these as they are printed and that they will appear in the minutes at our November meeting.
And I think the only committee that took a vote that should be reported up to the board is the Benefits and Services Committee.
Joy?
And
So
the compensation committee also.
Okay, so Joy, you just need to read into the record that.
So by direction of the Benefits and Services Committee, I move adoption of the 2014-15 Member Service Performance Objectives.
Okay. So you just need to vote on that. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Okay, thank you. The other one is the Compensation Committee, so I'll read that into the record. By direction of the committee, I move adoption of the proposed changes to Section 700 of the Board Policy Manual to create an incentive compensation evaluation format for the COIO position. By direction of the committee, I move adoption of the proposed changes to Section 700 of the Board Policy Manual to create an incentive compensation evaluation format for the Director of Inflation Sensitive and associated benchmark definitions. By direction of the committee, I move adoption of the proposed changes to Section 700 of the Board Policy Manual to the incentive compensation valuation format for the private equity asset class and associated benchmark definitions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No? Okay, thank you. So, does anyone want to pull item 14B, C, or D? Seeing none, no pulls. Any questions on 14B, C, or D? No questions? Okay, all those in favor of consent 14B, C, and D, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? Okay, thank you. Item 15 is consent agenda information items from the Appeals and Investment Committee. Those are accepted as received. Item 16, items referred to the committee by board direction. Were there any items referred to the committee, Jennifer, that you have? None, right? Okay. Item 17, information requests. I don't think, just the one, right?
There was the referral to the ARM committee.
Correct.
Oh, right.
Thank you. Item 18 is the draft agenda of the next committee meeting in November. Take a look at that if there are any questions. Jack, do you want to?
You hear you directed earlier in the meeting.
If some of the board members weren't there, that we would hear a legal opinion for the whole board at the next session around the cash balance plan, rather than the Benefits and Services Committee
In closed session.
in closed session.
Okay, thank you. Jack, thanks for that. Opportunities from statements from the public. Pat?
Thank you. Pat Carr, retired teacher, and I just was thinking after I heard the first agenda about the election of the active members and the introduction of new members to the board, we still don't have a representative from retired teachers on the board, and it's sorely needed, and I would hope that we would all keep this in mind and see if that can't be achieved within this next session or two. It's really needed, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Pat. Seeing no other comments from the public, the retirement board is adjourned.